Political corruption serves one, not all. It subverts the very purpose of government and creates distrust of elected officials. Corrupt politicians manipulate the economy, unfairly reward those loyal to them, and punish those who stand in their way. Hi, I'm Rich Burnett for Wondrium, and in this episode of Perspectives, 4 historians discuss political corruption in the modern world, and they explain how 2 former corrupt presidents got punished for their deeds. We begin now with a look at 2 basic types of corruption: bribery and gratuities.
The quintessential public corruption offense is bribery. Bribery is generally defined as a public official agreeing to accept something of personal value in exchange for the performance of some official act or exercise of official discretion. Bribery presents a fundamental threat to the proper functioning of our political system. The bribed public official has a conflict of interest. He or she is supposed to act for the good of all, but instead is acting for some private benefit. And this is contrary to the very nature of a representative democracy and corrupts our political institutions. Title 18, Section 201 of the U.S. Code contains 2 distinct but related crimes: bribery and gratuities. To prove bribery, prosecutors must prove the following: a federal public official corruptly demands, seeks, receives, or accepts, or agrees to receive or accept anything of value in exchange for being influenced in the performance of an official act, or being induced to do or omit to do an act in violation of his or her official duty, or being influenced to commit or aid in committing any fraud against the United States. Bribery is punishable by up to 15 years in prison, along with substantial fines and disqualification from holding any office of honor, trust, or profit in the United States. To prove an illegal gratuity, prosecutors must prove a federal public official knowingly demands, seeks, receives, or accepts, or agrees to receive or accept anything of value for or because of any official act performed or to be performed by the public official. An illegal gratuity is a relatively minor felony as federal felonies go. It's punishable by only up to 2 years in prison. Now, the statute also prohibits the flip side of both offenses just described. It's illegal to pay a bribe or gratuity, as well as to receive it.
Gilded Age Americans were greatly troubled by abundant evidence that big business was corrupting American democracy. Some of the most infamous political corruption scandals took place in this era. For example, the Credit Mobilier scandal was exposed in 1872. It involved massively inflated contracts and shady stock deals related to the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. The scandal implicated 2 prominent congressmen and many officials in the Grant administration. In another outrage of the time, the Treasury Department and liquor distillers were caught colluding in the infamous whiskey ring. This was an effort to defraud the federal government of excise taxes. But many, many more corruption scandals percolated at the state level. For example, the Pennsylvania Railroad enjoyed astonishing power and influence in its home state during the 1870s and 1880s. The railroad actually had its own office in the state capitol building, and its chief lobbyist was known as the 51st Senator. And there's actually a story that on one occasion, after a day of passing several bills favorable to the Pennsylvania Railroad, a legislator rose and suggested that if Mr. Tom Scott, who was the railroad's president, had no further business for the legislature to attend to, it ought to adjourn. In New York State, Jay Gould's Erie Railroad and Vanderbilt's New York Central Railroad competed for the influence of the state legislature in Albany by distributing vast sums of bribery money. The role of corporate money in politics was neatly summarized by Republican power broker Mark Hanna, who said in the 1890s, quote, "There are 2 things that are important in politics. The first is money, and I can't remember what the second one is," unquote. Big business seemed to enjoy at least as much influence in the judicial system, from the local courts and judges all the way to the Supreme Court. Legal decisions bearing on business in the late 19th century overwhelmingly favored business over the public at large, including especially industrial workers and farmers.
So by the time we are picking up this story, in the late 1960s, Filipinos had endured 2 decades of tumultuous independence under a series of presidents who kept promising economic recovery, land reform to help poor farmers and punish greedy landlords, and peace to a nation racked by peasant rebellion and a communist guerrilla movement. Ferdinand Marcos won the presidency in 1965 by promising to end the country's economic woes. But his opponents stymied many of his plans, and crime and unrest only got worse. His communist enemies got bolder and formed the New People's Army to promote the armed struggle for revolution, while a group called the Moro National Liberation Front began fighting for independence for the Philippines' Muslim minority. Marcos responded by trying to stamp out dissent and declaring martial law. But gradually, the regime became alarmed at the way Catholic-based communities were becoming a lasting political network for the opposition. After 1982, Marcos stepped up arrests of Catholic workers. All this time, the Filipino middle class, who were mostly Catholic, were getting angrier and angrier at all the greed, corruption, and brutality of Marcos and his cronies. His wife, Imelda, became world famous for her collection of hundreds of pairs of designer shoes. The last straw came when Marcos's henchmen murdered the main leader of the reform movement, a former senator named Benigno Aquino, as he was getting off a plane at the Manila airport. The middle class revolted and joined the radicals in mass demonstrations known as the People Power Revolution.
On the night of June 17th, 1972, 5 burglars broke into the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee located in the Watergate complex adjacent to Potomac River in Washington, D.C. Initially, the burglary seemed of little importance. It was characterized by President Richard Nixon's spokesman as a third-rate crime. But the FBI's investigation soon found a connection between the burglars and President Nixon's Committee for the Re-election of the President. As investigators later discovered, this was the second time the burglars had entered the DNC offices. The first time, in May, they went in to take photographs of campaign documents and to install listening devices, phone wiretaps, to monitor political calls. But the wiretaps had failed, and they needed fixing. The June operation was a black bag job to repair them. Even after the connection to the president's re-election campaign came to light, at first the Watergate break-in looked like it would pass Nixon by. 5 months later, in November 1972, he was re-elected in a landslide. In January 1973, the 5 burglars, along with 2 other Republican operatives, G. Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt, were convicted of conspiracy and burglary. That seemed to draw a line under the problem. Perhaps the end of the scandal was near. Then it spun out of control. One of the burglars wrote the presiding judge, John Sirica, and alleged that there had been a high-level cover-up by more senior officials. The burglar, McCord, also alleged that witnesses had perjured themselves and that the burglars had been pressured to maintain their silence. A short while later, Jeb Magruder, the deputy director of the president's re-election committee, admitted to investigators that he had in fact perjured himself, and he implicated 2 top Nixon confidants in the scheme, John Dean, the chief lawyer in the White House, and John Mitchell, who had been Nixon's attorney general until he resigned in 1972 to direct the committee to re-elect the president. During live testimony in front of the Senate, former White House Deputy Chief of Staff Alexander Butterfield revealed the existence of a taping system in the Oval Office. The disclosure shocked the nation and altered the course of American history. Of course, Cox demanded the tapes. So did the Senate. But Nixon refused to release them, citing his executive privilege. By a unanimous decision on July 24, 1974, the Supreme Court ordered that Nixon turn the tapes over. Released to the public on August 5, 1974, the smoking gun tape was of a meeting on June 23, 1972, just 6 days after the break-in happened. It revealed that, contrary to his protestations, President Nixon had been part of the cover-up of the burglary almost from the very beginning. The topic of the meeting was how the participants could stop the FBI from conducting the investigation. Nixon's aide, H.R. Haldeman, began the conversation. Quote, "The Democratic break-in thing. We're back to in the problem area because the FBI is not under control, because FBI Director L. Patrick Gray doesn't exactly know how to control them, and their investigation is now leading into some productive areas, and it goes in some directions we don't want it to go." Haldeman told Nixon that the burglars had been financed by the re-election campaign, and then offered a plan for how to contain the investigation. Quote, "The way to handle this now is for us to have Walters, the deputy director of the CIA, call Pat Gray and just say, 'Stay the hell out of this. This is our business here. We don't want you to go any further on it.'" End quote. Nixon agreed, again quoting, "All right, fine, I understand it all," he said. And so he gave the fateful order, quote, "You call them in. Good deal. Play it tough. That's the way they play it, and that's the way we're going to play it." The tape and its public revelation meant the end of Nixon's political support in Congress and across the country. Earlier, as we said, several congressmen had voted against the articles of impeachment in the House Judiciary Committee. Now, many of them publicly declared that they would vote for impeachment on the House floor. On August 7th, the Republican leaders in the House and Senate paid an evening visit to Nixon. They told him that impeachment was a certainty and that no more than 15 senators would vote to acquit him during the trial. And so, just a day later, on August 8th, 1974, Nixon announced his intention to resign.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn more about the topics in this episode, the full list of series that these clips came from is in the description below. You can watch them all on Wondrium. And don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel for new episodes of Perspectives, and you can watch previous ones here.